The storm and winds may...
Hi, I'm Townsend, minister here at the New Concord Church of Christ in New Concord, Ohio. I want to personally thank you for joining us today via this live stream. The purpose of this stream is to simply share the good news of Jesus Christ. While we appreciate you viewing this stream, this effort is in no way intended to be a substitute for the assembling together with the saints. We recognize, however, that there are circumstances that arise that might prevent someone from attending church service. And for this reason, we provide a means whereby people like you can hear the gospel preached. We hope you enjoy today's message from God's Word. Please feel free to share this stream. If you're ever in the New Concord, Ohio area, we'd love for you to drop by and visit with us. We meet every Sunday morning beginning at 9:15 a.m. for Bible class, again at 10 a.m. for worship, and again 6 p.m. for our evening worship. See you soon.
You hold me in your mighty arms, forever safe from harm.
Search they cannot find, for God alone does understand. There is a God. There is a God. He is alive. In Him we live, and we survive from dust our God created man. He is our God, the great I am. Our God, who sat upon a tree, a life was willing there to give, that He from sin might set man free, and evermore with Him could live. There is a God. There is a God. He is alive. In Him we live, and we survive from dust our God created man. He is our God, the great I am. Please be seated. Good morning. Today's reading comes from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 12. Finally, all of you be one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous, not returning to evil for evil, or reveling for reveling, but on the contrary, blessing. Know that you are called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. For he who loved life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil.
Good morning. Turn your Bibles to the book of Nehemiah. We're going back there again this morning. We looked at Nehemiah chapter number 1 last week. We talked about turning problems into possibilities. I mentioned last week that all of us from time to time will face a problem or difficulty or hardship in our life. How do we deal with that? And Nehemiah shows us how to deal with that in chapter 1. And very briefly, I'll explain or at least share with you the 3 points. If you weren't here last Sunday, the 3 points that we looked at from Nehemiah chapter 1. Turning problems into possibilities begins by visualizing. Nehemiah's a cupbearer to the king. He's got an important position. In fact, probably has everything a man could ever want and then some. But he's concerned about the report that he's getting or hearing from back home, back in Jerusalem. God's people had spent all those years in captivity, and now many years have gone by since Cyrus had issued a decree for the people of God, Israel, to return home. There were 2 waves that did return home, and Nehemiah is going to be the leader who will lead the 3rd and final wave back home. But before he does that, he's hearing about the situation. He's in the palace. He's got everything you could ever imagine, but he's concerned about home. And the report was, or the situation was dismal. Conditions weren't well. People were reporting back to him, and they were sad, they were dismayed. Many of them were ready to give up. There were problems all around. Walls were still down. The enemy still lurked. Things just weren't going as good as they had thought. So Nehemiah begins to visualize. He begins to form this vision in his mind of how things may have once been, where they now were. And he goes on and he's visualizing how the things that they could become. He didn't dwell on the negatives. He could visualize that. He could see that in his mind. Walls broken down, the fences and gates burned, people kind of holding their heads down. But he's holding his head up high and he's visualizing the way things can become. That led to the second point, and that was to agonize. It saddened him somewhat, even though he could see into the future. He knew things could get better, and he knew things would get better through the help of God. But he's agonizing. The people were in sin. What led to their captivity all those years before was sin, a transgression of God's law. They rebelled against God, and so he begins to agonize. And he takes that to God in prayer. We talked about his prayer. And how that if we're going to turn problems into possibilities, many times what we need to do is find ourselves on our knees, agonizing, praying to God with tears in our eyes, asking God for forgiveness, asking for God's strength and guidance. That's what Nehemiah does. And we concluded last week by talking about the organizing that he did. Not only did he pray, agonizing over things, but he also understood that while God was going to do his part, he had to do his part, Nehemiah. And so he begins to organize or formulate a plan, a strategy to get the job done. Long before he goes to the king, and I mentioned last week that going to the king with a sad countenance, going to the king with this idea that I want to return home, lead God's people, it could have cost him his life. But he trusted God. He had a plan in mind. He goes to the king. He tells the king what his plans are, what he wants to do, and even gives the king some things that he wants the king to do. We need to get up off our knees. We need to spend some time on our knees, but we need to get up off of our knees and begin to organize and then follow through. Do our part in the prayers we utter to God. Now in chapter 2, Nehemiah chapter 2, we see progress underway. In fact, I've entitled it Principles for Progress. I didn't get these points. I didn't come up with these on my own. I believe it was about 15 years ago. I was sitting in an assembly like this on a Monday night or Tuesday night of a gospel meeting in Johnson City, Tennessee. At Cherokee Church of Christ. I remember where I was at. I remember it was about 15 years ago. And Brother Clarence DeLoach, some of you may know him, was preaching a lesson, and he was dealing with the book of Nehemiah, and he talked about these points. I wrote them down 15 years ago, and I still had them. I've got a file. I've actually got a tub, a big tub of notes and sermon ideas. At one of these days, it's full. I'm starting on my second tote. I'm talking a big tote. Preachers that say they don't have enough material, well, I'll tell you what, there's more than enough there. You just got to open the book. Got to open the Bible. And I wrote these notes, took these notes from Clarence DeLoach. He wrote these points down, and I want to share them with you this morning. Number one, if you're taking note, Nehemiah, he fixed his focus. Notice beginning in chapter 2, verse 12. He said, "And I arose in the night." Now he's there. He's on the ground. He's at ground zero. And he's there, and at night it says he arose early. I and some men with me, neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me save the one that I was on. He's fixing his focus. He's got permission by the king. He's got everything in place, just as he had organized. Now he's beginning to implement those things. And I want you to notice in verse number 12, in fact, I highlighted it in my Bible. You probably can't see it. I didn't highlight it till today. All these years of studying this passage, I'd never highlighted this until this morning. What my God had put in my heart to do. It all begins, folks, right here in our hearts, in our minds. He's prepared his heart. He's fixed his focus. His number one focus, his number one goal is to do God's will. And the will of God for him at this point was to rebuild the walls around the city of Jerusalem. Progress begins when you and I, within our hearts, we have a mentality, a mindset that says, I'm going to do. You know, we've got to have that mentality that we're doers, that we are going to get it done. We are go-getters. And so he's fixing his focus. He knew what he was going to do. God had commissioned him to build, and build he was going to do. He fixed his focus. And so the question this morning to all of us is, do we have a mandate from God? Is it clear what each of us need to do with our lives? Have we found our place along the wall, or are we wandering aimlessly through life like a ship without a sail? Do you have a focus? Do you have goals? Now, individually, all of us need to fix our focus. We need to get our hearts right first and foremost with God. God needs to be in the center of our lives. He needs to be within us. Galatians 2, verse number 20. We are His servants. We've got to seek Him above all else. Matthew 6, verse 33. And so we've got to get our hearts right, and we've got to realize that we've got goals. We've got things that need to be repaired. Individually, collectively. Congregationally, do we have goals? Do we have a focus? We mention this all the time. I need to do a better job as a preacher. But the eldership, our leaders of this congregation, need to have vision, need to have goals, a fixed focus, where we are right now and where we want to go. That's what Nehemiah is doing. He's fixing his focus. He was commissioned to go to Jerusalem to rebuild the broken walls. And you and I, as God's people today, are asked to go into the world and help repair lives that have been broken down by sin. Many within the church have no real sense of belonging. Maybe that's you this morning. They're not involved. They've never found a work that they're comfortable with. Don't be like the Tekoite nobles in Nehemiah 3 verse 5 who wouldn't stoop to do anything. Don't be like those people. Be like Nehemiah and the others. Fix your focus. Realize that you're an important asset to the congregation, to your home, to your family, to your communities, to your school. Understand that and get involved. You are important, and there's something that all of us can do. I preach this all the time. I know that you're probably getting sick and tired of me saying it. Side note, Dave mentioned the fact that he had checked the board. That was what I did last week. Remember, I got on my dad about he had 2 different numbers for the invitation, so remember that? And then was it Clay last Sunday night mentioned that he got it right? I got the song leaders paying attention to that. If I can get all of us to pay a little closer attention to living right, Larry, I will have accomplished something. No, I didn't mean for that to come across negative. I know they were just picking on me. We've got to fix our focus. We've got to get our hearts right. We've got to remember that we are important, that we are valuable. Now, moving on, go down to verse 13. I went out by night, Nehemiah says, by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well. Now he's giving us places, points, particular places where he's going that people in that day and time would have known about, the different points of entry into the city. And he's going to these different places, the Bible says, and which were broken down. Verse 13, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. It was pretty bad. There was just narrow passageways. Why? Because of all the debris that still lined the streets. Then went I up into the night by the brook and viewed the wall and turned back and entered by the gate of the valley and so returned. Verse 16, and the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did, neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. Number two, if you're taking note, notice that Nehemiah here is finding the facts. He's finding the facts. He's personally inspecting. Now he's using the cover of darkness. You might ask, well, why was he doing that? Just a few men with him. Why was he doing it at night? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. I believe first and foremost, he didn't want all the others to completely understand or know what he was doing yet, because he himself, even though he knew what his job, his responsibility was, he still at this point didn't know the totality of the work before him. And so he's gathering up the facts before he then relays that information to those who were going to help do the work. Remember, Moses sent out 12 spies into the land of Canaan in Numbers chapter 12. It's a land that God had promised and said, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. It's a land that I'm going to give you. But despite that, God was going to do His part. Moses knew that. Joshua knew that. But the men still had to do their part, and so they're going out, Moses sending out the spies to gather the facts, the information, so that they might know how or what best course of action to take to conquer the land. You remember Paul sent Timothy back to Thessalonica. What for? To gather a report, to gather the facts. He's finding the facts. What were the facts? Well, for Nehemiah, the facts were God's work lie in ruin. Walls were broken down. Gates were burned. But you see, before speaking to the rest of the people, before he could delegate some authority to them, before he can give them the plan of action, he had to know that for himself. He's gathering the facts. We have walls broken down today. I mentioned last week, walls of morality. Our homes are in disarray, walls of security. We must find the facts and then begin to organize a strategy to fix it. Mel Otte, I know, Larry, you've probably heard Mel at Polishing the Pulpit, and I don't know if it was this year or last year. I believe it may have been this year. He's a man he's a law professor and preacher. He teaches law at Faulkner University in Montgomery, Alabama. He's come up with, and I'm not sure, I think it was a denomination that may have where he started his thinking on this, and he's incorporated it. But what he's doing is he's now going around and sharing information on, or to leaders of congregations to help gather information about the local congregations where we serve, where elders are at, where preachers are serving. And a buddy of mine recently was telling me that they implemented this where he's preaching, and it's a set of questions that are asked to every member of the congregation, and they're told to fill it out, not to use any names. They said, then what names? They gather all that information up. They're gathering facts together to figure out what it is, what's our strengths, and what's our weaknesses of this congregation. He called me the other day and said, you would not believe what I found out. Found out as the preacher things that he had no idea about the congregation. Maybe we'll implement that one of these days in the future. In fact, he's supposed to be sharing that information or sending that to me this week. They're finding the facts. Notice in the third place, go down to verse 16. So he's not told anybody yet. And then verse 17 says, you see the distress that we're in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we be no more a reproach. And I told them of the hand of my God which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. I want us to note point number 3, that now they're forming a fellowship. They are forming a fellowship. Nehemiah understood the importance of getting people together, working together, being united. He understood that there's strength in number and great power in unity. Ira North once said this. He said in an assembly like this one time, he said, it's better to get 10 men working than it is to do the work of 10 men. Maybe I've shared that with you before. And that's true, isn't it? It's better to get 10 men working than it is to do the work of 10 men. I've heard down through the years, had an elder in the Lord's church in my first work years ago, loved him to death. I probably shared this with you as well. But he told me one time, he says, Terry, you're going to learn one of these days that if you're going to get anything done within the church, it's just best that you do it yourself. Think about that with me for just a moment. I kind of understood what he's saying over the years. That a lot of things, getting people to do things sometimes is difficult, and if you're going to get it done, just do it yourself. But at the same time, if we're really going to be successful, if we're going to move forward, we're going to be, all we can be, we've got to get everybody on board and everybody doing their part. I can't do the work of everybody. You can't do the work that I can do, and vice versa. We all have to find our place. And so we've got to form this fellowship. Local leadership must motivate people to work together. That's one of my jobs as a gospel preacher. The elders' jobs or duties is to get people to rally the troops together and to get them all on the same page, an understanding of what each person is responsible for doing, and then delegating that authority and sending them out to get the work done. Forming a fellowship. Scientists have concluded that Canadian geese flying in a V can fly 72% further than if they were just flying by themselves. Did you know that? Why? Because they've realized geese, think about it. If geese can figure this out, we humans ought to be able to figure it out, right? We got some goose sense, don't we? They understand, and it's God-given to them by doing that, and they're big birds. Aerodynamics and everything that's included in that. I'm not a scientist, but they have proven that they can fly 72% further when they're flying together in that formation. When you and I figure this out, that we can, as we work together and forming a fellowship, each doing their part, imagine what more we can do. There's power in number, there's power in unity. Coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Thinking together is unity. Working together, that's success. That's what Henry Ford said. The early church understood this in Acts chapter 2. They were forming a fellowship. Some 3,000 obeyed the gospel on the day of Pentecost. The Lord was adding unto them daily those who were being saved. Acts 2 verse 47. They were meeting together in the temple daily, studying the Bible, meeting in people's homes daily, enjoying common meal. They were forming a fellowship. I like what Dad and Delbert did last week with you 55 plus. Some of you stayed, some of you didn't, that's okay. But they realized, let's get this group together, beginning to form a fellowship, to do more together as a group. We need to do more with our youth. Millennials. We've got some millennials here. I've got one at home. I hear about you. Listen, millennials, I love you. I don't understand you. I really don't. But I'm going to say this. We need the millennials in the church. And we need to be doing more with them. They've got some great ideas. Again, I can't always figure them out. I can't figure Leah out half the time, but I know this, her heart's right. And we need to listen to them, and we need to form that fellowship. Number 4. Go back to chapter 2, verse 18. Real quickly. Then I told them of the hand of my God which was good upon me. What's He doing? He's fortifying their faith. That's central. That's key. Our faith. It begins and ends with the faith. And what Nehemiah is doing here is, principle for progress, I've got to solidify, I've got to fortify, I've got to strengthen their faith in God. He's telling these people who had come back with him, others who had been there and were discouraged and dismayed, they didn't have all the tools, they didn't have all the know-how, they'd been in captivity. They had few resources. They had enemies. Perhaps they felt they couldn't accomplish it or get it done. But he's saying, listen, God is with us. He's fortifying their faith. You and I need to know, we need to understand that the good hand of God is upon we, His people. And because of that, you and I can accomplish great things. Oh, I know, I hear it all the time. I've heard it in other places where I've been. Well, the best years are behind us in the church. You ever heard that? I hate to hear that. I understand what they're saying. Congregation 25, 30, 50 years ago was twice as big as it is now. We were doing twice as much work. Well, of course, you had twice as many people. Duh. But it's almost like when I hear that, it's like, the best years are behind us. There's nothing more we can do. We're on the decline. And sometimes I allow that negativity to get the best of me, and shame on me. Who says we have to stop? Who says the best years are behind? I believe the best years are before us. Again, I want to talk to the millennials for just a moment. I see there's you millennials, right? See, you're smiling. Millennials sitting right up here in the front. We've got some over here. Young people, and then we got a couple millennials behind them. I believe the best years are ahead of us. Why? Because I believe in God. I believe what God said, that if He's with us, who's going to be against us? That we can do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. Ephesians 3 verse 20. I believe that. Nehemiah is fortifying their faith. The elder's job, my job as a preacher, is to, when we gather together in places and assemblies like this, is to help solidify and fortify your faith. Listen, folks, we can do it. Go to Revelation chapter 3 before I get too fired up. Revelation 3, beginning at verse 7. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, These things saith He that is holy, He that is true, He that hath the key of David, He that opens, and no man shuts, and shuts, and no man openeth. I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name. Has God set before this church, this congregation here at New Concord, an open door? I believe that He has. I believe that He has. Have you ever wondered why some congregations are growing and why other congregations aren't? If God's opened up doors, and a congregation whose doors are open wide stands still, that church is destined to stagnation and decline. They don't do anything about it. Congregations that grow are those where members walk through those doors that God has opened and take advantage of it. We're in a great location. That's a door that God's blessed us with. We're blessed almost every week with visitors, not only outside our community, but it's seemingly almost every week, folks from our community. That's an open door. The writer here, John, is telling the church here that God's opened, God has blessed you with an open door. I believe He's blessed us with open doors. And we, to continue forward, must take advantage of those doors. Fortifying our faith. Moving on. Go to verse number 19 and 20. But, everything's been really exciting up to this point. They're fighting. It's been kind of dismal, yes, but now Nehemiah's got things going. He's found the facts. He's forming this fellowship, and each person's kind of excited. He's fortifying their faith, saying God will prosper us. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard that God was going to bless His people, heard that God's people were going to rise up and build, when they heard that, they laughed us to scorn, despised us, and said, "What is this thing that you do? Will ye rebel against the king?" Then answered I them and said unto them, "The God of heaven, He will prosper us. Therefore, we His servants will rise and build, but we have no portion, nor right, nor you have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem." Point number 5, he faced the foe. Mentioned in Bible class. Listen, every time the congregation, the Lord's people, is doing what God wants us to do, you can rest assured our enemy, Satan, is going to get in there and try to stir things up. And he's going to start kind of simple. He'll just kind of laugh at it. Look at that small group down there at New Concord. Who do they think they are? They're nothing. They're nobody. We've got an enemy. We've got a foe around about us. They're watching us. They don't want us to succeed. Go back to verse 10 of chapter 2. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. You learn, even as he's coming, before he hits the ground running, the enemy's already heard about him and already upset. Right after I moved to New Concord, some of you have heard this story. I was invited last year by a man to discuss some things. I didn't know I was getting myself in the middle of about 6 or 8 other religious leaders in town. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't realize that was, but they got me down there and they cornered me, so they thought, and started talking, speaking false doctrine on a subject that they didn't realize was near and dear to me. You know, and so I found myself in the middle, and so I let them talk for 10 minutes, maybe 15. Each one of them tell me who they are and how important they are. You know, this one's a doctor and professor at the college, and he knows the Greek and Hebrew, and just real important people. And I thought, wow, this is pretty. And then they start preaching this false doctrine to me, and they then ask me, "What do you think about that?" I had to face the foe right away. And when I started sharing with them in a very loving way, as loving as I could, what the Scripture teaches, they turned on me in a vengeance. Reports were that the new preacher in New Concord has started a holy war. We're going to have foes, friend. But we need to remember what Nehemiah said, what Paul said. If God be for us, who can be against us? You see, when we start to rise up and build, Satan is right behind us, rising up and blasting. We're building walls. He's using dynamite right behind us, digging holes, trying to blast the walls that we build. The door of opportunity swings on the hinges of opposition. Simply put, there's no lazy or cheap way of serving God. If you think you're going to go through life as a child of God on a bed of roses, no problems, think again. I'm telling you, if you're doing the will of God, if you're living like God wants you to live, you're going to face some opposition. You're going to have some challenges in your life, but we've got to learn to face them. Now, there's a time to stand up. I believe the opportunity, it was a door, it was an opportunity they gave me. They asked me, it was an opportunity for me to stand up. But sometimes the best thing we can do is what Nehemiah did in chapter 6, when they wanted him to come to, "Oh no," sometimes we just say, "Oh no, not coming there." Sometimes the best thing we can do is not say anything. We've got to learn those battles, pick and choose the battles that we fight. Finally, we've got to fulfill our function. Chapter 3, as I said before, I'm not going to read any of these verses because I'm going to be honest with you, that's a Hebrew phone book. I cannot pronounce half those names there, but that's all Hebrew names. Leaders of families who had returned to help Nehemiah rebuild the wall. But there is a phrase or a couple phrases here found throughout this entire chapter. And it's this: next to him. Next to him. Next to them. Next to him. Next to them. The point is this: how do we build the church? Next to him, next to her, next to them. You don't have to have great talent to find your place, is the point. God expects you to do what you can with what He has given you. Each one of us have different talents. Matthew 25, beginning at verse number 14. I think about her, H-U-R. We need more men like her. Who is he? We just read a couple times mentioned in the Old Testament. He's the one who held up the hands of Moses in that battle. That's all he did. When his hands were faced upward, God's people were winning. When he would get weak, start to drop, God's people would start losing. Her came in and said, I'll do my part. I'll keep your hands up for you. We need more men like Barnabas. Or women like we read about who gave the 2 mites that Jesus looked at and said, she's given more than all those who gave. We need people like that. There are 3 things worth noting relative to the fulfilling of our function. Number 1, pattern. They were organized. They knew what to do. They organized a plan, and every leader then delegated some responsibility. They didn't try to do it themselves. Nehemiah gets his leaders together and says, here's what needs to be done. They go take it to their people. They delegate authority to the others. And you see the pattern here? There was also a principle involved. Everybody had a job to do. But then finally there were people. What's the church? It's people. It's diverse, yes, made up of both young and old, rich and poor, educated, non-educated. We got millennials here. We've got young people here. We got infants here. I love babies. We've got older folks here, 55 plus. Then we've got those of us right in the middle, right at 50 years old. We're of every background. That's the church. In chapter 3, verse number 5, and I'll close out with this, and I mentioned this earlier, don't be these people. And next unto them the Tekoites repaired, but their nobles put not their necks to the work of the Lord. The only negative verse in the entire 3rd chapter is that one verse. Don't be a Tekoite noble. Do what you can. What am I going to do? Where is my work? Do you want to build your character? Do you want to help build your career, your home, the church? No matter what, I think in Nehemiah chapter 2 and chapter 3, he gives us the principles for progress. Fix your focus, get your heart right. It begins by allowing the Lord into that heart. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, the heart door. If any man will allow me to, I'll enter in. That's our obedience to the gospel. When we submit to Him and put Him on in baptism, we allow Christ to be number 1 in our life. We've got to fix our focus. We've got to find the facts. We've got to form a fellowship. And we've got to get connected, folks. Many are upset. Many are often, there's just nothing here for me. It's because they've never connected. Part of that's our fault as leaders, but it's also on the part of each one of us to form that fellowship, to get involved. To fortify your faith, face the foe, and to fulfill your function. If we can assist you this morning in your obedience to the gospel, will you not rise up this morning right now and begin building as together we stand and as we sing?